Hello, Doug.
Well, hello. Oops,
How
my video's not on. There you are.
There we go.
Yeah.
How are we doing today?
All right, I think. How do I know?
I don't know.
When I was younger, I used to know how I was doing, and nowadays I just never don't know.
Is that what happens in old age? You just don't know how you feel.
Um, there like more and more layers.
Oh, I see.
You know,
Okay.
so you see something and something else comes up and causes and conditions and all kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I got that to look forward to.
So how are you doing? How do you think you're doing?
Well, I think I'm doing good. I think I'm feeling good today. It's a sunny day. A
Yeah.
little bit of snow where I'm at, but I'm nice and cozy where I'm at inside of my room. What's that statue you have behind you? Is it a statue or a painting?
Uh,
Yeah, right
that-
there. Yeah.
um, well, it's an interesting story. During the Senate Watergate hearings, I was temporarily between jobs, and so I was living out here in California then, so I would get up early in the morning and turn on the Watergate hearings. And in the meantime, I had a book of photographs of early Americans, their original photographs. And so this was a Pomo Indian
Oh.
from Southern California. And I was experimenting with using, well, in that one, it was black ink on white paper and just copying these. This guy over here was done at that same time.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, you can't quite see it, but what I loved about him was there was something about his eyes that you could see that this guy had suffered a lot, but was still just like fully composed and fully present and not thrown by that at all. So I found it very moving.
Yeah, isn't that interesting how you can kind of like feel something from somebody's eyes sometimes when you look them dead in the eyes and you can, like you said, almost feel their suffering in a way.
Yeah.
It's like,
Part of it is, and you can't see it there, but his eyes were very moist.
oh yeah.
You know, there weren't tears coming out, but there was enough, a little bit more, and there would have been tears. So there was a kind of a wide openness to that, and yet he felt just completely and naturally composed all at the same time.
That's an awesome story. I feel like that means something too. Like, there's something to that stoicism of that image.
Well, I was depressed for the first 40 years of my life, and it took just a lot of deep work and meditation and therapy and all kinds of things to work through that. So I have some sort of resonance with seeing suffering, particularly people who have not tried to rise above it, but actually gone through it and out the other side.
And that's how that's really the only way to do it, right? Is to go through our sufferings, right? Or at least confront them.
Yeah. Otherwise you're doing an override, and those are fragile. The Old Testament story of Jacob wrestling with a demon.
I don't know that off the top of my head, but if you know it, feel free to tell it.
Yeah, well, the story is there was Jacob and his big brother Esau. And Esau was this big burly guy and hairy arms, and back at that time, an ancient, it's probably pre-Israel, but it was way back in the tribal days. The eldest inherited everything from the family, and anyone less than that would get nothing. So Jacob went to his dad, who was reportedly, 170 or something like that, and his dad was almost blind, and he had put a sheepskin over his forearm. And so his dad went out and felt the sheepskin and thought this was Esau. And so his dad gave him the blessing, which formally transferred all the stuff.
Oh.
And it wasn't undoable. So Jacob had gotten what was supposed to be Esau's. And Esau was just, enraged and was going to kill his brother. And so Jacob took off. And, he left the area and he went over to a neighboring area and settled down and had several wives and family and kids and flocks. He did quite well, but he still had left this thing of trying to set things right with his brother. So he decided it was time. And so they were traveling back. He got all his flocks and his family and his sons and all that, and they were traveling back. And then the last night they were traveling, they came to the Jabbok River. And so they camped on the far side of the Jabbok River. And the next day they were going to go on the rest of the way and meet his brother and see if they could settle this. So that sort of gives a sense of what Jacob's frame of mind was. And so the story is he woke up in the middle of the night and there was some being in the encampment. It was too dark to tell who it was. And but it seemed very threatening. So Jacob, what was interesting, what he did was he got his family and all of them up and took them across the ford of the river. And then he went back into the encampment alone and unarmed. And something grabbed him and threw him to the ground. And so he wrestled back, and so they wrestled, for several hours. Jacob didn't win. Whatever this entity was didn't win. And then the sun began to come up. And so this entity reached over and with one finger dislocated his hip. So it's like, wait a minute, whatever it was he was wrestling with was really powerful, was holding back. I left out part of it. So this thing said to him as the sun came up, release me, for I must go. And Jacob said no. And that's when he reached over and dislocated his hip.
Okay.
And so this thing says, release me, for I must go. And Jacob said no. And then he asked, well, what do I have to do to get you to release me? And he said, you must give me your blessing. And so he gave him a blessing, was that from him a whole nation, it would be the father of a whole nation, which for that culture at that time was the highest blessing anyone could receive. And so Jacob released the demon, who turned out to be an angel, and limped off into the sunrise. So the core of it, what I take from that, is anything that can really scare you, that can throw you off, has got a lot of power in it. And you want to wrestle with it, not to defeat it, but enough to get some boon, some blessing.
Yes.
It.
To like transmutate that energy of whatever that demon or angel is into better working for yourself. That's good. That's great. And that's that's just like the essential story of no clinging, just let it go. I kind of see the parallel between that story and the basic tenets of Buddhism. And
it's a little more central than even that, because the first noble truth, and I see the noble truths, they're actually meditation instructions. And the first one says, there's a 3-part repetition that says there is suffering, and from which Buddhism get this reputation for being pessimistic, but that wasn't it. It was just, everybody think it's being pessimistic. I just ask people, well, is there anyone here who's never suffered? No, we all do. So it's just actually a simple, kind of mundane, almost obvious truth. So there is suffering, and suffering is to be understood. And the understand there is not an intellectual analysis, but is a kind of deep, intuitive knowing about how suffering works. So I think, how would you know a good friend? Well, if you know a good friend, you know what they tick, how they tick, what sets them off, what lifts them up. You really understand how they operate.
Yeah.
And so the Buddha was saying that you must understand suffering. You must understand how it operates. And so it's the place where Buddhism starts.
Do you see parallels, like a lot of parallels between biblical passages or other holy book passages and like tenets of Buddhism?
Well, you have to really dig deep, because I think these truths are really universal, and the problem with Christianity is so much of what we know about in the popular culture is what's come down through the church, and which had other kinds of agendas, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But if you go back to the mystics, the ones who are in direct experience, It's all there. I think it's all there. The language is very different.
Yeah.
Buddhism doesn't use language of gods and deities and that sort of thing so much because it's
Yeah.
got such a charge to it, it throws it off.
It's all it's all like pointing in the same direction, right? It's just different lingo, different ways to really express universal truths about the human condition.
Yeah. Well, St. John of the Cross, I mean, one of his most famous writings, The Dark Night of the Soul,
Hmm.
and so you look at suffering, dark night of the soul, and how to deal with that, etc., and
Mm.
certainly find things that resonate between them all. It's difficult talking about Christianity and those others in some Buddhist circles because what most people know is the more popular forms of Christianity, which has a whole other layer of stuff.
Mm.
But, I read St. John of the Cross or Meister Eckhart or, you know, um, even Ralph Waldo Emerson, they were,
Yeah.
they were far out dudes. You start reading between the lines and try to figure out what these guys were experiencing. It's like, boy, they were out there.
Yeah. And I feel like that's the true essence of, Christianity or the mysticism. The mysticism behind Christianity is the true message behind it. And people
Yeah.
like you just mentioned that's really what it's all about. And I mean, why has it been so construed over the years? Have people just through human nature just kind of corrupted it in a way?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at Buddhism and you look at the Buddhist text, there are some places in the Buddhist text where they talk about the Lord Buddha, and he's really this elevated guy. If you go back to the very early text, the Uddhavittaka, the Udana, the Sutta Nipada,
Hmm.
uh, there's no elevated guy. There's this guy who they usually call the wanderer,
Hmm.
who was obviously deeply loved and deeply respected, but he's actually comes across as really, really human. And then there are some texts that were probably written down during his lifetime, and then there were other texts that weren't really written down until 3 or 4 centuries after the Buddha died.
Mm.
And
Wow, that is when 400, 300, or 400 years is insane because that's the difference from 1620 to 2020. So
right,
if there was a Buddha in 1620, we would just be writing it down right now in terms of
right.
that. That is
And
that's
if we didn't have any record except what was passed down orally for 400 years,
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is even more insane too. That's
yeah.
okay. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh no, that was okay. And it was an oral tradition. They did have writing, obviously, but the writing was for contracts. I'll give you so many cows or so many chickens.
Yeah.
But sacred material you don't put into that mundane written form. Sacred material had to be alive, so it was passed along from person to person.
Yeah, do you think there's something to oral transmission rather than, transmission from text? Because there something that's lost in translation from when literally I'm talking about the Buddha or whatever, and then if I were to write down something about the Buddha's lessons, like, is there something like, is it some kind of, like, weird energy that isn't transmitted or something that's just a little different, you think?
Yeah, yeah. You could look at it even in simpler terms. I mean, I can tell you something, you know, and you can't write down what I mean. What you
Mhm.
can write down is how that impacts you and your understanding.
Yes. Okay. Mhm.
And yours can be quite genuine, and there can be close alignment, but it's as it comes through you.
Yeah.
And so, um,
It's like another variable because it's like yeah, it's just like another point of translation in a way. I see what you mean.
yeah. So if you really want to understand the text, what I think you have to do is I always get like 5 or 6 translations from scholars I trust because my understanding of Pali is not that good.
Mhm.
And look at all the different ways it's translated, and then take all that into my own experience. And it's sort of with a question: what is it the Buddha might have been saying that could, let me just turn this off.
It's fun.
Yeah. What is it that the Buddha might have meant that could be translated or mistranslated this way?
Mm.
And then for that, you have to feel your way back in with your own experience.
Mm.
And that's as close as we can actually get. It's not very satisfying because we want to know what he actually said, as if there was somebody back there with a TV recorder, or something like that. But
Yeah, it's like a scientific approach in a way.
yeah,
Simple, take it, experiment, and see if it works for you. Take what you need and check out what the results are, and then keep experimenting. Whatever works for you, it seems.
right.
That's a
And
simple
then come back,
process.
then come back and look at the text again. And sometimes
Hmm.
there'll be passages there that just don't make any sense to me. And then my practice goes deeper, and I look back and say, "Oh, that's what this guy was talking about. I had no idea."
Oh, that's great. So actually, before we go any further, I love how this conversation has transpired so far. If you could actually give a little bit about yourself and your practice and how you came to be where we are right now, and on December of 2020, and then wherever the conversation goes, we can take it.
Okay, okay. Well, I don't know how far back to go. So I always was drawn towards this sense that there's more to us than meets the eye. And so I was always curious, in exploring that. So that was always there. And the other thing that was there was that I was chronically depressed for the first 30 or 40 years. And what that did for me was that I couldn't just cruise. A lot of people just sort of cruise. Well, if I just cruised, it went downhill.
Mm. Hmm.
So I had to keep looking at this stuff, and I had this curiosity, to start off with. And so I was a minister of this little tiny church, Unitarian Universalist congregation in central Massachusetts. And
Whereabouts? I,
Ashby, Massachusetts.
oh, okay. I live in Taunton, Massachusetts.
Okay, yeah. So this is east of you, straight north of
Cool.
Fitchburg, which was interesting because my great grandfather, my father's side, was the guy who founded Fitchburg, Massachusetts. So somehow I ended back there.
Wow, that's awesome.
Um, so I was in this little tiny church, and I had Daniel Ellsberg came and talk to my church, and Scott Nearing, and all these, far out guys, back in the late 60s that were doing things. And somebody said, well, you ought to get a spiritual dude to come out here. So who do you want? And I said, well, how about Ram Dass? And so I said, what the heck? So I wrote this note to Ram Dass and asked if he would come and talk at my church, and said, we're a little church, out in the countryside, and we draw people from a ways, but we're not a big thing, but we need inspiration here too. And I was just blown away that I got this note back, and he said he was going in a retreat. He'll be out in about 6 weeks, and he would be glad to come.
Wow. What year
So
was this? You
this
think?
was back in the early 70s.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So he came out to my church, and I gave him dinner, and did all this thing. And I felt like, for the first time that I had met somebody who actually knew something about something.
Hmm.
I wasn't sure what, but I wasn't sure I had ever met anybody who knew anything about anything. But he knew something about something.
He knew something just by you could just tell by his energy. Something.
His energy and the way he talked and his presence, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And meditation seemed to be important to him.
Mm.
And so I wanted more of what he had. I mean, it was just that kind of spiritual greed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked him, what to do. And he said, well, in Massachusetts, there's just this embarrassing abundance. And the Insight Meditation Society had just been started out in Western Mass. And Joseph Goldstein, Jack Cornfield, and stuff. So I wrote to them. I signed up for a retreat. And I just kind of went in cold turkey. for
So you never really meditated ever before, and then you just were like, "Hey, I want to be like Ram Dass, kind of. I want what some of this guy has."
well, I had been meditating on and off for years, but it was one of those things where I would meditate for 10 minutes one day and 20 minutes the next day, and then I'd forget it for 3 days. And
I see.
so I just sort of flopped along.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided that if I did a 10-day retreat, at least I get some momentum going.
Mm-hmm.
And so I signed up for I think it was a 2-week retreat. And and I remember the first evening, sitting down there and starting to meditate. And then it dawned on me that I had, 9, 10, 13 days left of doing nothing but this. And this big light went off in my head. It said, mistake, mistake, mistake. How was I going to do this? So I sort of fumbled through that whole retreat. And it was really, really messy.
Say
But
messy.
messy.
Oh, why is that?
I didn't know what I was doing, and
Oh.
I was trying, and I was fumbling around and doing this, that, and the other. But
Mm-hmm.
when I left the retreat and got home, I started meditating for an hour to an hour and a half in the morning, an hour to an hour and a half in the evening. I haven't stopped since. So that got me started, and I went back the next year, and so I was off and running.
Mm.
And then in 2000, I moved from Massachusetts out to Sacramento.
Mm-hmm.
Became the lead minister of this large Unitarian Universalist congregation. And I went out to Spirit Rock, and I connected up with John Travis, who was a teacher at Spirit Rock, who's just really wonderful for me. And so I started going seeing him once a week,
Mm-hmm.
and doing more retreats. And he introduced me I realized that I was going into jhanas. I didn't quite know what jhanas were, but I heard Larry Rosenberg talk about jhanas formally, and I thought, jhanas, these are for real meditators, these aren't for me. And so as he was talking about it, I sat and meditated and ignored it. But as he was talking, I realized he was actually talking about states that I've been going in and out of, but nobody had ever spoken of. And so I went and talked to him about it.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, yeah, that's the first jhana, that's the second. And I started, I got a little weepy, and I said, I've been struggling with this all my life, and I didn't feel like I've ever gotten any place. And he put his hand on my shoulder and said, I don't remember what the words, but there was something to the effect is, I pronounce you a good meditator. But it wasn't that. It was just like formally sort of really acknowledging that. And I just got weepy about it.
Mm-hmm.
So when I met John Travis and was talking about the jhanas, he knew this guy that he'd known for a long time, Bhante Vimala, who did a lot of work with the jhanas, and they weren't the concentration jhanas that you hear more about. They were really more awareness jhanas, so were based more on the text.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did my thing. I wrote to him and said, I'd like to come do a retreat with you. And I went out. That was 2004, 2005. And I did probably 2 retreats a year, 10 to 14 days each.
Wow. That's
awesome. And he was really quite gifted at recognizing where I was and how to work with that. And so I just kind of moved up through the jhanas really quickly.
Do you think you need a teacher like to help you? Do you think it's like needed, or is it just very, very helpful to have somebody that's kind of guiding you along your spiritual journey?
Yeah, that's a good question, and there's not a good answer to it.
Yeah, it's probably different for everybody, right?
Yeah, and it depends on temperament. I have a student of mine in Europe who had meditated, fumbling around for about 6 months and hadn't gotten anywhere. And he got a hold of me, and we started talking, and within 6 or 7 or 8 months, he'd gotten stream entry.
Mhm.
Uh, and it took me 40 years, 30, 40 years and stuff like this guy. Uh, and so he was clearly, quite gifted, just naturally, good karma, etc.
Yeah.
Just, um, and me, I stumble around,
Mhm.
but I get there. And so I think a good teacher who really knows what they're doing can um, keep you from going down quite so many blind alleys like I have.
Oh, so it's like
Uh,
guidance.
yeah.
Mhm.
And I also think people who have difficulty learning it in some ways are actually better teachers.
Why is that?
Um, because somebody who is just really good at it may not really understand all the blind alleys people can go down.
Oh, I know what you mean. If somebody's just a natural, they don't know
Right.
how they could really mess themselves up, or other people could mess themselves up. I know
Yeah.
what you mean.
So I have very few students who stumble around who I think, oh yeah, I've been down that alley.
Yeah. Mhm. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So through these various practices with various teachers, you have relieved your, essentially putting it simply, you relieved your uh mental sufferings in a way, like your depression that you spoke about. Has it brought you like to a sense of ease and peace or happiness in your life?
Yeah, although it's actually a lot more complicated than that. I
I
mean,
can imagine.
I'm certainly not enlightened.
Hmm.
Um, but what I've just been realizing recently was some old habits that I had from those years of fighting my way out of the depression.
Hmm.
Is that is that the whole trip is a lot further out and just a whole lot simpler. And there was a part of me that was still trying to keep um, unwholesome states at bay, try
Hmm.
to keep them off. And at some point, that just doesn't work
Yeah. Hmm.
because that's actually aversion. If you're trying to push the negative way, that you're adding aversion to aversion. It
Yeah.
doesn't. Uh, and and again, we can go back to the others of the Four Noble Truths if we want. But part of what the Buddha talks about in that is at some place, it's just turning towards the wholesome. And as you cultivate those wholesome qualities, they will bring everything else along.
uh
So that, for examples, now I can sit down to meditate, and I've learned a lot of techniques and stuff, and I can work very hard at it for take me about 45 minutes, and gradually my mind will quiet down, and it gets into a pretty nice place. Other times I can sit down and meditate, and I'll just turn my mind loose, and
hmm.
it runs around like a banshee on speed or something like that. It just goes crazy for 5 or 10 minutes, and then it drops
Hmm.
without any warning into this deep stillness.
Oh.
And so I think, I can work really hard at this, and I'll get quiet in about 45 minutes, or I can do nothing and the mind will quiet itself in 5 or 10 minutes.
Hmm.
And I wish it was that simple, but because there's sometimes in the banshee will go on forever, and I need more techniques and stuff like that. But I think what I was trying to get back around to was that um, wholesome and unwholesome states are not enemies.
Mm.
That
Hmm.
um, I can be, um, well, I'll find it sometimes, in this pandemic, it's sometimes the isolation just gets a little old,
Yeah.
and I can feel a little bit slightly depressive or something like that. And then so I go out and I live near the American River, and I'm so walking along the river, and I look up and there's a tree there, and the tree doesn't give a damn whether I'm happy or sad. And suddenly I look at the tree and I don't give a damn whether I'm happy or sad. I just am what I am.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I realized I'm grinning like an idiot. There's this deep sense of well-being that suffuses through me, and there's still some of the gripping of being tired or bored or lonely or something like that,
Yeah.
and that those can coexist together.
Mm-hmm. They have
And
to, right?
yeah, yeah. So we're always trying to get rid of the unwholesome and get the wholesome.
Yeah.
But if we just cultivate the wholesome, uh, and then gradually that'll penetrate it. And I don't think the unwholesome actually completely disappear
Mm.
until we don't care whether they're there or not.
Yeah.
And so they just sort of fade into the background and slowly, sort of drift off. And then there's this well-being.
Mm.
Um,
That is the weird irony of it. It's, I mean, it's essentially like yin and yang. It's like you can't have the wholesome without the unwholesome, and you can't, like, you have to embrace that. There is no getting rid of it. It's essentially just, it's like I know what you mean. It's like energy. You can't just have the yin and you can't just have the yang. You need both. It's just it's just recognizing it. I know what you mean, because a lot of people, just like you said, are averted to all of those negative things, and it's just the more you shoo it away, the more it makes it stronger,
yeah,
which it seems counterintuitive.
it,
Hmm.
it's a demon's blessing.
The demon's blessing. That's good.
Yeah. So, come back to where we started.
Mm, wow. So what um what have you, how am I trying to say this? What Where are you at now from all of these years? Uh are you like, do you want to spread this knowledge to others? Is your place to be a teacher? To like, that's what you are, right? You're a meditation teacher, right?
Yeah.
So you're spreading the love essentially, right? You're trying to have everybody else be on that same wavelength and using the same practice that you had.
Yeah. So, um, to just say it very succinctly, there every morning when my first sitting, I do refuges, precepts, and aspirations. And the last line of the aspirations, um, I just reworked them several months ago, goes, when sending and receiving kindness feel the same.
That's good. I
Self,
like that.
self dissolves in contentment, and
So,
ambition fades into timeless presence.
wow. That was you? Those are your words?
Those are my words.
Can you say that again?
Um, when sending and receiving kindness feel the same, like whether you're sending or receiving it, it's actually the same space inside.
Mm-hmm.
Self as a separate dualistic thing, self dissolves into contentment, and ambition, the desire to get someplace, fades into, I first said eternity, but that's got a little bit too much churchy stuff to it. So I ended up fades into timeless presence.
That's good. So essentially, it's through our love and selflessness, we become selfless ourselves. Like, we fade into just that flow of being a good person, kindness and goodness, and essentially that makes us happier. It's like that's the way. We're following the path, like to make us happy. And the path isn't necessarily through materialistic gains, right?
Yeah.
It's through just being a good person. It's that simple.
Yeah. And it's a little further out than that. It's not that we change or improve ourselves.
Sorry, it seems like the sun is in your eyes on the video. If you
Oh,
want to adjust, it's
yeah.
if it's uncomfortable for you, I just wanted to give you time to adjust it, just because of something I noticed.
No, that's, yeah, we're 3 hours earlier than you are. And so the sun is coming up over the trees there.
Oh yeah, that seems like a lot better.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Um, so um, the essence of it all is really non-dual. So there's not like a demon to wrestle a blessing from. The blessing is actually there. So in Buddhism, it's talked about as the two truths. There's a relative truth and the absolute.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the relative, you can talk about getting somewhere, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how the um, consensual, the normative, world operates. But um, behind it all, I'm not really a separate organism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you took if I went straight up 300 miles, um, dressed like I am now, in a minute or two, there'd be nothing left of me but a bunch of ice crystals.
Mm-hmm.
So, I cannot survive unless I'm embedded in this thin layer of an ecosphere here with all these other creatures and everything else. So, on some fundamental level, I am not separate. I'm just, an energy movement in this total flow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from evolutionary selection, people who were just at peace with everything tended to get eaten and taken out of the gene pool. And
Yeah.
those who were paranoid about protecting themselves, they lived longer. So we have deeply wired into us this belief and understanding that we're a separate self and that's how the world operates and we can do all that. But behind it all, it really isn't true.
Yeah.
And so it's really it's about attuning to what's actually here rather than attaining. So
Mm.
the peacefulness and the kindness and the compassion are not something that we can find or create. They're
Something
just,
we tune into.
yeah, that we have, I have a chapter in one of my books, I call it attuning, not attaining. There's nothing to attain, but there's something to be said for attuning,
Mm-hmm.
to what's there. And so that's the truth of what we really are. And so the art of it, because in Buddhism, it's not either extreme, it's the middle way, there's both of them. So it's acknowledging the relative world when you're on the other side of the continent that I am, and we're talking through this mysterious, magical electronic technology, etc. And the sun is coming up here, and it's
Yeah.
probably reaching zenith where you are, and all that separateness. And yet, on some real fundamental level, there's underneath all of those layers of stuff, there's a place in me which is actually no different than what's in you.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
And all that just exists at the same time.
Yes. That is. Well, that was beautiful. Yeah. There's no separation. There's no locality to our unity.
Yeah.
It's just it transcends all matter, transcends all space and time. That unity is this everlasting um, presence in a way that is just always with us. I know what you mean, 100%.
And so there's a me that's separate than you
Hmm.
within a certain time frame. So if the
Mm.
time frame gets narrower and narrower and narrower, okay, I'm here and I'm there. But if we spread the time frame out to like a couple thousand years, then that clearly who I am is something that rose up and came together and then dissolved and went back into everything.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so at this moment, I have a being, but in timelessness,
In
the
timelessness, yeah,
just
you don't.
coming and going.
Yeah. In time, we are just a collective being, it seems. Like, yes, we in this very small amount of time, we are these small beings, but through the large amount of time, which even human beings haven't even been around that long in relative to the universe. So, I mean, what we are into like billions and trillions of years is this crazy cosmic creation. But yes, in terms of humanity, if you do space out the history of humanity, yeah, it seems to be we are this collective being that is a result of billions and billions of very short uh, spans of beings that think they're not part of the collective, or at least they seem to have some kind of amnesia about the collectiveness. And from that, we have created this the human race, which is really at our truth, at our core, one being in itself.
Yeah. we are fireflies. Just blink, gone. Blink, gone.
See, that's a scary concept for, I mean, it's a scary concept for me. I'm not gonna say I'm above that concept for pretty much everybody. And throughout my practice, at least, is it's brought me peace to be at that, to know what we really are. Because if we do believe that we are just this separate being, this ego, that I am Gary Haskins in this meat suit, then yeah, that's gonna cause a lot of fear. That's gonna cause a lot of suffering. That's gonna cause a lot of just like emotions that aren't true to myself.
Yeah,
But if you do these practices, these meditations, yoga, whatever you have to do to reach that those states of, I guess you can say enlightenment or awakening, or just states, other states of awareness, to see that what we just explained, to know what we are. We're just part of this giant organism in this crazy cosmic conundrum. Then it kind of makes that feeling of dying not so, I don't know if you want to say bad, just makes it not so fearful. It's just like, oh, this is just the process. This is kind of what we're living
yeah.
in. This is life and death. There's yin and yang. It's how it's supposed to go. So essentially, the biggest thing that I've got from my meditation and yoga practice is kind of like, I don't want to say 100%, but it's kind of um, negated my fear of dying. I'm not gonna say it's 100%. If it was a car coming at me at 90 miles per hour, I'd obviously step out of the way, or I'm not gonna like self-immolate myself in the streets. But it has, to a large majority, of or large percentage of my fear of death has been kind of just, I don't know if you want to say put in the background, but like I kind of understand it more. It's kind of like more of a comprehension thing rather than an actual just like staying up at night and fearing about it. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah,
was
yeah, no,
explaining my practice.
yeah, yeah, no, no, I'm with you. And what fascinates me in all this, and the process of all this, is actually the process of identification.
Yeah.
We identify with this body, with certain thoughts or stuff. Uh, and so part of what I think is just far out to look at is actually watching the identification happen,
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
because I think it's wired into us.
Mhm.
Again, if everybody was like you and really not scared of death, your genes would be taken out of the gene pool much more quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
If you didn't have enough fear to step out of the way of the car, yeah. So you have a blissful life, and then you're gone. You're
Yeah.
irrelevant to that.
It's not
Uh,
even not having fear, it's knowing how to work with your fear, like we explained
that's right.
before. Like, you need both. It's not ha obviously, I'm a human being, I'm doing the fear
Right.
thing. It's more of just knowing how to respond to it in a way.
So I'll tell you the thing that scared me the most in this past, uh, I don't know, several weeks or several months,
Mhm.
is looking at this whole identification process.
It's what? Say that again?
Looking at this identification process that goes on
Mhm.
inside us.
Mhm.
And I don't know about you, but there's like a voice in my head,
Yep.
and that's talking about stuff. My voice likes to explain things a lot.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's why I became a teacher or whether it's a byproduct of it, but that happens. And sometimes it complains, and sometimes it's celebrating, and sometimes it's bragging, and sometimes it's apologizing, and all kinds of things.
Mhm.
And so as I was just watching the voice, and and rather than thinking about the content, just listen to the voice, I realized uh, there's nobody there.
Hmm.
Whoever it is I think I'm talking to, there's actually nobody there.
Wow. Yeah, who are you
And
talking to?
and, and it's like it's such a simple, obvious thing, but I felt like the old Roadrunner cartoons where Wile E. Coyote chases the Roadrunner off a cliff and he goes out a quarter mile before I realize he doesn't. There's no ground underneath him. That's what I felt like. I was just
Yeah.
suspended.
Mhm.
There is, and um, it was both terrifying, and I found myself grinning like an idiot. Kind of where we started. It was both the fear and this tremendous, freedom at the same time. And
Yeah.
it's not that I've arrived at anything, but watching the voice inside me, not the content, but the tone and the texture and seeing what it's doing,
Mm.
uh, kind of helps me see it as a process rather than what I am,
Mm.
and that what I am is completely mysterious and and evaporates. It can never be pinned down. But I can see uh, how the mind processes create the sense of self.
Yeah. I
And
feel
if you
like
could,
that is. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, and if you can see the sense of self being created, whatever's watching it is not it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
Exactly.
whoa, right here we are.
Then who's watching the witness?
Yeah,
I don't know.
there is awareness, and yet what is it that's aware? The noun behind it
Mm.
can't really be known. We can know the process. We can see a process going on, but what it is if it's actually experienced, because no matter what you experience or who you think is experiencing it, you can always turn your eyes and look at that.
Mhm.
And so what is that that's looking?
Mm.
And what is that that's looking? What's looking?
Yeah, I think that's just how our mind works. It's always looking for a subject. Subject object. That's just it's also how our language is kind of structured. It's just like we're always looking for that subject object polarity. And there's something that is art we always want to cling to, but I think it's the essence is lying in really identifying with not it's not even identifying with non-self. It's
Right.
don't right? It's don't identify with self and don't identify with non-self, which doesn't even make conceptual sense.
Yeah. And so where I go with all of that is I always try to trace this stuff back to an evolutionary process.
Mhm.
And we as a species, we don't have big claws or big teeth, that our number one survival mechanism has actually been to band together.
Mhm.
And so, relationships and interconnections and stuff is deeply wired into our DNA just to survive. Because those who are loners and have these weak bodies are more likely to get picked off by the local predators than the ones who actually stuck together.
Mhm.
And so to see that this identification, this relating and talking to you and explaining things and listening and all that sort of stuff as something created as a fluke out of evolutionary laws, not something that's got any grandiose epistemological reality of its own. It's just a way that we function,
Mm.
and there's nothing behind it other than that. It helps our DNA reproduce itself, and that's all that's needed to keep it going. It's
Yeah,
not
that's
not because of some grandiose something or other. And even God, and get into trouble, but I'm a minister, so I can do this. Um, I think is taking our sense of self and projecting it out.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Mm. Mhm.
so because there's something about us that just wants to be in relationship, and so we
Mhm.
project it out. But is there anything beyond that?
I don't
It,
know.
it's worth exploring. And I don't know if there's a good answer.
There is no answer. I think the only answer is that there is no answer. I mean, maybe you can experientially feel certain states that may allow you to come to certain insights and see the universe differently, but there's always going to be, if you're using the mind, some kind of subject and object relationship. I feel like even if you're saying it's just any kind of words that we use or any kind of concepts of the mind, yeah, there's no way to really that non-identifying with non-self. It's emptiness, right? That's essentially.
So we'll go back to where we started.
Hmm.
The noble truths. They're not really noble. They're just plain or ordinary, obvious observations and a way to deal with them.
Then
Uh,
I think you said in a video that the truths aren't noble, but the people that are the ones that come to the realizations of the truths are noble, right? Or something along that line.
that it's a noble.
Ennobling, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So the second one is the word is tanha, which is often translated as craving, but that's way too narrow a term. It's actually a tightening, and it can be
Mm,
craving, and it can be just oh,
mm-hmm.
all kinds of things. And then the practice that goes with that is a very dramatic term. It's abandon. Uh, and so as we're looking at all this stuff and the sense of self and who is this and what can be interesting is just to, as you're doing that, look inside and see if there's any place that's tightening.
Mm.
And if you see that, to see if you can soften that and relax it.
Mm.
And when that goes deep enough, you end up in, I was going to say, a non-dual state. It's not really a state, but that the separateness of things fade into the background.
Mm.
And so from the practical level, it's always looking for the places where we tighten. And it's not even getting rid of the tightness, because that just adds aversion to something. But it's just, I think of it as sort of like this. If I make a fist and I hold on to it, it can start to hurt. And if I ignore it there, I can keep it tight for a long time.
Mm.
But if I actually pay attention to that, it's actually harder to keep it because I feel how it hurts and it just naturally relaxes.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm.
So there's a way in which when we see the tightness and just open up to it, it just naturally starts to dissolve.
Mm-hmm.
And as that dissolves, the sense of separateness can still be there as a useful mechanism, but you see that the reality behind it is just a shadow.
Mm.
And can feel that spaciousness, really.
Spaciousness. Yeah, that's a good word. How would someone recognize that tightness that you describe? Because I know what you mean. I think, is there any other terms that you can use than tightness, or any other way that you can describe some, like, that negative emotion that I think you're getting at, like that kind of
See, it's not.
unwholesomeness?
Yeah, it's not even emotion, because emotions usually have a story with it. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're angry, you can get all caught up in what you did to me, and blah, blah, blah,
Mm-hmm.
and it's got all that story and stuff. But I can also look inside and just see if there's tension, tightness, or just even a kind of a density.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know what it's like for you guiding this interview, but if you sort of look inside, I mean, you're in a certain role that you,
Mm-hmm.
honorably in this, and there's probably at various times things will tighten up a little bit and then loosen a little bit behind it all.
Yeah.
And so it's just learning to watch that. And the thing to be careful with is you don't want to be playing with sharp objects all the time, because there's so much of how we operate that depends on having that sense of self. And so as that softens, um, you spend more time with it. Then you gradually get your sea legs where you can be in it, but it can be a little rattling at first. And the rattling is actually a tightening. So,
Mm.
it's rattling. Oh. So what I call it is, so my translation of the second noble truth as a practice is relaxing into.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm feeling depressed, I relax into the depression. If I'm feeling angry, I relax into the anger. If I'm feeling joyful glee at having something, I relax into the joyful. And so it's always turning towards it and relaxing into it.
Mm. First, you have to embrace it, right? First, you
Yeah.
have to confront in a way, or like first you have to first be aware.
Well, the first noble truth, understanding suffering, the practical translation I use for that is turning towards.
Okay.
There's something going on, and the first thing you just need to orient towards it. And it's not do anything with it, but it's not go like that, but turn towards it.
Mm-hmm.
And then see if there's any tension. And if there is, relax into the tension. So you're not relaxing as a way of distancing yourself from it.
Mm.
Just relaxing into it. At
Yeah, that's
which
good.
point it gets spacious. And then it's a long story, but the third noble truth I translate as deepening or savoring. So when there are good feelings that come up, you just let them marinate it, let them soak into your bones.
Mm.
Because biologically we're wired to notice pain more than pleasure. So when you notice some uplifted feelings come there, it actually helps to just be with them. Uh, the word in the text is realize, but I think it's an awkward translation. What it means is make real. How do you make something real? And just let it soak in.
Hmm. Wow. And then the fourth noble truth is the Eightfold Path, right? Follow the Eightfold Path.
Yeah, and I call it an eightfold checklist.
Can
So
you go through the Eightfold checklist real quick, just for anyone who doesn't know?
yeah, so there's the first three, which I call the three essential practices.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very complete in and of itself. But there's times you can do the three of those, and when it doesn't quite work. And so if it's not quite working, then the Buddha gave these 8 places where you can look and see if there's some holding.
Mm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so first one is wise view, which is just how you're seeing it, and that drives the whole process. Depending on how you see things, that will create intentions, unconscious intentions, just an orientation. So it's wise view, wise intention. And then the next 3 have to do with how you relate to other people in the world. So there's wise speech. And the Buddha had more to say about wise speech than anything else, because it's a place where we get entangled the most.
Mm-hmm.
So third one is wise speech. And then there's wise action. Speech is a form of action, but speech is so much of itself. He took it out separately. So you look at your actions. And then there's a subtler one of that action, which is livelihood. We all need some way to manage, keep body and mind stuff together in the world. And how, is there something harmful in the way that we do that or not?
Mm-hmm.
And then the last 3 have to do with the practice itself. So one is, I call it wise effort. So it takes some energy, but not strain. So so if you're straining in your practice, you can feel the tightness, and you need to relax that. The next one is the one that is mistranslated most. It's usually translated as wise concentration, but the word there is samadhi. And what
Mm-hmm.
samadhi is a mind that is actually unified and relaxed.
Mm.
In English, the word concentration implies too much effort.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Bhante Vimalaramsi calls that collectedness. So there's a settledness, and then there's sati, mindfulness, just awareness,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a byproduct of all of it. So you can look at those 8 if you're doing the first 3, turning towards relaxing into and savoring or deepening, and those aren't really working, then you can look through those, and you don't have to do them in order, and just see if there's some place that's out of balance, and that can help fine tune it.
Oh, that was great.
Eightfold checklist.
I like that. That was great. Mm. So you obviously know so much of Buddhism, and I don't know, you probably know so much more than I could ever imagine in terms of the any kind of Buddhist any belief system. And so what if you know the Eightfold Path and the Noble Truths and those are tenets to live by? How come you chose not to live the monastic lifestyle at this point? Like, is there what do you think you get out of being Doug Kraft rather than being, a monk?
Um, so, a monk's life is to withdraw from the world. Maybe not totally, but they're actually pull apart from it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something in me that wants to be engaged.
Yeah.
And believe me, a monk's life has strong appeal to me.
Mm-hmm.
There's so I do go on long retreats and do that sort of stuff. But in the end, I have a wife. Can't believe we've been married for 50 years. I've got 2 sons. I got some grandkids now, and and my heart goes out with all of them. And so um, my path is a little more complicated. It's really more one of a householder.
Mhm.
And, and I, strand, all kinds of stuff in that. I've retired from the ministry. Um, and so I could have more time just for teaching meditation. And there was a time in my life, for a long time, where actually building spiritual communities and all of the logistics and administration, and all of that stuff that just comes with that. We
Mhm.
had to rebuild our church at one point. Talk about a big in the world project.
Mhm.
And there was a time when I just loved doing all that, nuts and bolts of what it's like to create a spiritual community.
Mhm.
Um, these days, I'm not drawn to it as much. But I still really love talking with people about their practice and when they are, and as people do well in their practice, and stuff moves along. There's uh, nothing that brings me more joy than that. So I do a lot of mentoring of people at that center now.
Mm.
But we'll see how it goes. We'll see
Mhm.
how it goes.
I think what you just described though is that's like you said, that's your path. That's equally as important as being a monk. Like that's just that what's more liberating than liberating others in a way, it's kind of like it's a being like the taking the role of the bodhisattva. That's
Mhm.
why I think of monks and I'm like, well, what necessarily is a monk trying to do other than liberate himself? Like, I think there's a saying, you could probably iterate it better than I could, that Buddha didn't want to stop his incarnations until everybody was on the other side of the river. So how is a monk really contributing to that, other than their own personal in their body salvation? That, if somebody is just kind of like recluse and shut off from the world, and literally almost quite literally shut off from the world, um I don't know what word to use other than value, but where is the like kind of spiritual value in that? Because if you're not helping others, which if we just concluded that others are also ourselves, then what are you really doing,
Have you ever met somebody who seems like they're, I don't know, partially actualized, as feels like they go really deep?
They go really deep, like really far
Like
out
it's
people.
like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
And it's inspiring.
Oh, I see. Okay.
You kind of see what's possible.
Mhm.
And and I've been fortunate because I've met a number of these people, and on the one hand, it's like they're way out there, and on the other hand, I look at them and I say, there's nothing about them that is essentially different than me,
Mhm.
and so that, like, is a tremendous motivator,
Mm. I know
you
what
know,
you mean.
to I can see what's possible, and I can see that it's real. It's not just a fantasy. And I
Mm.
look at this person, and it's not like they've got you know um, different hormones and or something like that. They're fully human, and yet what they do, and that becomes yeah is an inspiration.
I know exactly what you mean. I know.
We live in an incredibly complex society.
Yes.
Uh, there's this image of one of the um, Buddhist gods of compassion that has 1,000 arms, and each arm has a different hand on it, and each is doing something different. And so, but we need those 1,000 hands. We need all those different roles. We need people raising conscious children. We need people teaching meditation. We need people who can help heal bodies. We
Mhm.
need people who are gifted at educating people.
Mm.
And so, what our what our path is. See, I don't think we get to choose our path.
Mm.
It's really something that resonates with us. It's actually to find what our path is. And it's not that one is holier than the other, because they're just all part of this larger collective of all of us.
Mm. Yeah, you're correct. I shouldn't judge. Oh,
and
man.
And judgments are just the mind's way of protecting itself. And so my response to that, because when I see myself judging, it's this, it's a reminder. It says, it's all perfectly safe. It's okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Oh, wow, that was great. So, do you think obviously humanity is changing, right? We're moving toward what you just said, like this multi-limbed being of compassion and just creating. I don't know what we're creating, but I think we're creating hopefully a better society through a little struggle, through a little strife right now, and through a little growing pains, I guess you could say. So, how do you think that we change, like you said, through raising our children consciously? Is that more important than kind of me trying to like have a conversation with somebody and say, "Hey, man, you got to wake up. You got to you got to follow the eightfold path." Like, is it more important for social change for us to really raise the next generation to be just different people and raise good people? Is that more important? Like, do you think social change? My question is, do you think social change occurs over the course of generations?
Well, I think it obviously has. I think it obviously has. I don't know
Hmm.
if you're familiar with the work of Ken Wilber.
Who is it?
Ken Wilber.
I don't know Ken Wilber. No.
Yeah. He's an incredibly bright and educated guy. And what he's studied is the word consciousness has different meanings. For some people it's just synonymous with awareness, but the way he uses the term and other people do is how we process information
Hmm. Hmm.
and how we humans process information. Well, you can see kids when they grow up, it gets deeper and deeper and more subtle and sophisticated.
Hmm.
And what he's been able to lay out pretty convincingly is how humanity, over time has been evolving higher, more complex uh, ways of integrating.
Of
So
processing.
of processing, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So I try to pull these off the top of my head. I'm going to embarrass myself, but uh, so at the Buddha's time, so the highest level of consciousness that was generally available. There are always exceptions. People go way out. But what is today we call traditional literal, which is what you think of as a fundamentalist,
Hmm.
which in today's world, I mean, that's not the most advanced around by any means.
Hmm.
That was in the Buddhist time, and that's his stuff was passed down through traditional literals. So that was stuff we talked about earlier about trying to figure out what he really said when the people passing along may have not gotten it.
Hmm.
And then you get more into the scientific empirical, where the traditional literal is kind of embedded with the empirical scientific method that stands back and looks at things more objectively. And then
Hmm.
you get into postmodern pluralism. And then where the leading edge today is up in areas that he calls integral, which are people who can think in many different systems at once.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know, so that you could actually take on a traditional literal outlook and to actually see what the world looks like through those lenses and take on a scientific empirical and see all those different ways and those kinds of minds are much more integrative because they don't have to separate from other people in order to see how they think.
Hmm.
So yes, we are definitely evolving as a species, and that doesn't mean that it's inevitable.
Hmm.
One of the things that boosts um, the evolution is actually when a particular type of consciousness is no longer adequate
Hmm.
to the situation we're in, when we need to go deeper. But there's no guarantee that we actually will. I mean, we just may blow ourselves up.
Yeah, we could.
And
There's always that possibility.
this past year, it seems like the world has been in more dire circumstances than I remember in my lifetime,
Mm, yeah.
and that can really move us along. And we could also blow it, and if you look back just even on this planet, 99.999% of the species that ever been here are extinct, and there's no, you know, We could be extinct, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we could. I don't think we will. There's something in me that tells me maybe I'm just a little too idealistic, maybe I'm a little too optimistic. I don't think we're gonna blow ourselves up. I think we'll be all right. But even if we do, we'll be all right, you know? Even if we do blow ourselves up, it's still gonna be okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, man. Um, I don't really have any other questions. I don't know really if you have any other questions for me, you can ask them. If you have anything you wanna get off your chest, if you really wanna plug anything, now's your time.
Okay. Yeah, no, I didn't come in with anything. You know, uh, I wrote you, said, anything I should be prepared? She said, no, we'll just talk. So,
Yeah, I think that's the way to do it, just kinda have
yeah,
a good conversation. Just wanted to get to know you and, like, your philosophy a little bit better, and I definitely did, and hopefully anybody who listened definitely did as well, and hopefully somebody got something from it. If nobody did, I did. So I appreciate you coming on here and,
well,
giving us some words.
I've written 4 books on meditation, and so I think I could go through all that stuff in probably about 20 hours. So, of course, of what's relevant to the moment. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. Yeah. I think
So
that's
thank
kind
you.
of where, sorry, I'm just going off again. So
Uh,
that I think
yeah,
that's where, like, authenticity comes from, is where we can kind of just don't have anything prepared, and, because that's kind of just, like, throwing off the whole vibe. Like, even though we're not in the same room and actually having a conversation, we wanna keep that. I try to
I
keep
thought we
that.
were having a conversation.
We are having a conversation. It's just through, like we said before, through magical ways.
Yeah, yeah,
And through that, I like to try to keep it authentic as possible, because this is really not authentic. Using this and this is like, it's some kind of weird contraption that are we're just you're just getting used to now.
yeah,
So I think when you add another element of, um, I don't know if you want to say fakery, but if you add another element of, like, kind of like trying to sway a conversation in a certain way through questions or through certain ways that things that you want to talk about, it can take away some of the authenticity of an interaction. Not always, obviously, but I think structure kind of takes away from us just being real people, me being real with you and you being real with me.
yeah. Well, it's a non-dual dialectic.
Uh,
You can
mm,
structures can help, and structures can strangle,
yeah.
and free flow can be uh, creative and spontaneous, and it can sometimes just be messy and indulgent.
Hmm. Yeah, time and a place. Definitely. Time
Yeah.
and a place. But yeah, thank you very much, Doug Kraft, for coming on. This was great. I'm definitely interested in some of your do you have, like, any guided meditations online?
Um, I have these people who have been doing all the stuff we've been taped and putting them out in a podcast.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah, I have listened to actually a few of those, yeah.
yeah, and I don't know that there's many guided meditations in there because I tend to teach in a more traditional Buddhist style, which really sort of allows people to flow where it goes. When I'm working with people, mentoring them, I will actually sometimes guide them. So it's like 2 of
Mm,
us look at their things,
that
but usually in group stuff, I don't. So that's a
that's
long
cool.
answer, of which the short answer is
I know what you
probably
mean. It's not like
probably not.
traditional. Probably, yes, probably. Go look for yourself. But yeah, thank you very much, Doug Kraft. This was a great conversation. That's all I can really say. I'm eternally grateful for you coming on.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Well,
Namaste.
namaste and have a good day.